Welcome to episode 133 of the omnigamersclub podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including the Hibby R1. My name is Mark USA.
And my name is Daniel Wynter. Hello, Mark.
Hey, how's it going? You usually do the starter, so I'm switching it up.
What a horrible night for a podcast. Lots to talk about today. I've been talking about some of the retro games that I've been teasing at for the last few weeks. But before that, we've got our appetizer. We talk about some other game-related topics.
Nice. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, it's still early in the year. Not a big news week, other than the classics of layoffs in the video game industry. Of course, there's been some layoffs at Inverse and the Verge to sort of they weren't dedicated to gaming, but they had gaming verticals on those websites, and they've had hits. One bit of silver lining in that is a new video game website has been announced that is called Mothership. This is being launched by Maddie Myers and Zoe Henner. It's launching on January 26th, but it's basically dedicated to viewing games through a sort of feminist and through the lens of gender and identity, essentially. So, obviously, it's a little more niche, but I think that's a great. Video games are so diverse, and every game supports multiple perspectives, and we don't just need another website reviewing the same AAA games, with a slightly different name. I think different perspectives and different lens on our games is great to see. Looking forward to see what they come up with. I've been following Maddie Myers from Triple Click, another podcast. Looking forward to what they put out with that.
Nice. Yeah, I actually think it's really cool that there are so many independent news and podcast sources out there. It's not that hard to keep track of them. It's not like in the old days where you had to pay money to have a physical newspaper subscription and you were only going to have one newspaper delivered to your door every day or every weekend. We can track more than one digital information source in this day and age fairly easily. And I do like how they all have a different perspective, different lens, a different slice of the pie, and that actually makes for more well-rounded research and discussion, because you get all those different perspectives baked in.
Yeah, obviously there is a cap for most people in how many different websites and Patreons and whatnot they can support. But there's a flavor out there for everyone. I think as long as you're supporting one of these, I think if everyone was supporting one or two, then the industry would be in a much healthier place, put it that way. One other one I want to quickly shout out that I'll be calling back to later in the dessert is a website called Unwinnable. And they aren't dedicated to video games. They do a little bit of movies and music and book reviews alongside video games and some board games too, I think. Which I think is partly what we try to do here. The full breadth that media has to offer. That's what our whole dessert section is for, and that these mediums are all in conversation with each other. So Unwinnable has a deal right now. You might not be available by the time you're listening to this. I think they're closing it this coming week. But if you subscribe for the coming year, you get all of last year's issues for free. Most of the content in those issues have actually been replicated on the website anyway. So most of that content is available. But if you want to get another sort of collected, curated format in these sort of digital magazines, I've really been enjoying that. So I've been digging into last year's offerings and finding some new games, new movies, and lots of recommendations there that I'll be pulling upon. So yeah, lots of options out there. As Omnigamers here, we try to view any one particular type of game through a bubble, and let all the varieties of games and other medium be in conversation with each other. So that's another option for you there.
Yeah, it's funny, before you mentioned that about Unwinnable, I was just thinking about that old joke about indie musicians where they only have $20 and they're just sharing it around back and forth supporting each other's shows and whatnot. Feels kind of a little bit like we're doing that with indie news, but in a good way. I think there's actually listeners perking up and taking notice and actually supporting independent news sources, which is great to see.
Yeah, well, they had a goal last year, Unwinnable, that is that if they hit a certain milestone, that they would put out an issue dedicated to Final Fantasy and the politics within those games. So I believe they met that goal, so stay tuned for that.
Very cool. All right, I have very little to share during my news, to share during my appetizer segment, but start to tell people about a little obsession that I'm embarking on. Everyone knows that I'm into my retro game devices. Well, I just moved on to the neighboring category, which is a burgeoning category out there, of digital audio players. So I think everyone's probably of a certain age is familiar with what old digital music players used to like, whether they were your Discman, mini disc player, or the venerable iPod. I owned a few iPods back in the day. And probably about 4 or 5 of them now that I think about it, of all different stripes, including the good old click wheel, all the way down to the nano or whatever. And they're all very interesting, very kind of imperfect devices, but they had a lot of charm to them. And maybe all this talk about kind of paying but not owning for content has really made me think more and feel more passionately about just collecting more, not listening to the what the algorithm provides, and trying to be cognizant of music I care about and that I'm consciously collecting, and trying to think more about people in music having opinions and being paid to curate selections of music like we do for games. I think it's important that there's some thought put into it, not just kind of like this merging and blending of digital key tags and things like that, trying to morph everything down into like the simplest kind of average and mean of the world's musical tastes. I don't want to subscribe to just what everyone else is listening to. So to that end, I've started to collect. I've started to pull out my old CD collection, which my kid was already starting to listen to, which was also cool. But I've been taking a stack of CDs at a time out of the library. And eagle-eared listeners will know that I mentioned the Hibi R1. That's this microscopic little audio player, which is
very small.
It's very small. It's palm-sized. And it's quite a bit smaller than an iPhone or a smart device. And, a lot of people will ask, well, you can just load up audio files onto a smartphone. Why don't you just use that since you already have it in your pocket? And that is very true, but you could argue that about retro game ROMs as well. And I think just the idea of having a device like that, being dedicated to just listening, is amazing for a couple of different reasons. It helps me focus. So when I'm listening to that, like the phone is away. Like it's not near me, it's not on me. When I'm winding down to go to bed these days, I'm usually like playing, a retro game on a retro handheld, listening to music on my modern day iPod, and my phone is already gone to bed. And you might argue and say, well, that's just still looking at screens. But it's about checking out mentally. When I look at this cute little music player, the brilliant thing about it is that, like, only good can come out of this, right? This is, even if I can listen to, sure, challenging music that makes me happy or whatever, but, I'm not going to get aggravated because of some algorithm. I'm not going to get some horrible news from this. I'm not going to get distractions and pings from this app and that app. It's not the everything device. It's a very specific device. And I guess I'm just trying to be a little bit more mindful about that.
We've both been big advocates for intentionality in how we, play games and consume other forms of media. I mean, consume even is a bad choice of words there.
Right.
Absorb, internalize, I guess.
Digest.
But I mean, I've spoken often how I prefer to read physical media compared to like an e-reader, but there's a lot of articles and like Unwinnable, for example, digital articles and reviews I've been wanting to read more of, but trying to do that on my phone or even at my computer here, so many distractions. So I've started dedicating. I've got an old tablet basically that is connected to the internet but isn't like have constant notifications popping up, and so I can
Right.
sit and read in that and be committed and focus on that one thing at a time, which yeah, good for the old attention span.
It makes a difference, yeah. And the other factor about this audio device is that I in this sort of obsession that I get in certain ways, I got obsessed about retro game handhelds too, and this and that, board games, obviously TTRPGs, tabletop war games. I get into these topics and kind of binge and
Hyperfixate.
learn all I can. And one thing I learned recently is that there are these various different kind of codecs. Everyone's familiar that there's different file types that you can utilize for digital music. Like WAV is like uncompressed. It's basically equivalent to CD audio. MP3 is obviously the world's most famous one. But there's several other file formats as well that are lossy or lossless, which retain a lot of data. But beyond that, even if you have a lossless audio file, Bluetooth devices actually, it's very, very rare that they will have the right codec to be even able to render close to CD audio.
Hmm.
Which is to say, the playing device has to have it, and the receiving device has to have support for the same codec. LDAP is an example of it, of one that's pretty high end, but even that's still not CD audio quality. So plugging into an audio device, which this device has an audio jack,
Actual port. Wow.
an actual audio jack. Even my cheap plug-in headphones connected to this sound better than my expensive Bluetooth headsets because just the pure fidelity is not being cut down by being transmitted through the wireless. So that's a big difference as well. It's a whole world I'm diving into. I'm not going to go further about it because I'm still learning at the beginning of my journey, but I might talk about it later. And I'd love to hear if anyone out there in the audience has been into this longer than I am. But yeah, just loving listening to more music, ironically listening to less podcasts and news, and just kind of like having a more positive outlook, which I definitely needed.
Yeah, I know. I know becoming a real audio sicko, it can be a trap, and an expensive trap at that. It's like chasing the dragon of the perfect sound. So I try not to get too caught up on that. I mean, especially if I'm mostly listening to podcasts in one ear at a time.
Yeah.
Matter quite so much.
Yeah, you're right. It is a whole world, and I don't want to be, kind of one of those pretentious, audiophile guys. I definitely don't want to go there. But there are actually really inexpensive solutions out there that I'm learning about that. And then there's this sort of like online community of people that are into, modern hi-fi in the way that people are into retro games. They're out there, and if you want to learn more, you can. So I'm enjoying just kind of the learning part of it.
I know Rob Zachney over at Remap is a big advocate for high-end audio equipment, so I'm sure he's got some recommendations out there too.
Yeah, thankfully there's lots of material out there. There's the tradition of hi-fi has kept on, but it's just become further and more niche, which is ironic because we have such these powerful devices, and Apple, like they had the hottest MP3 player in the whole world, and then they just kind of gave it all up because of streaming. They used to sell songs one MP3 at a time for $1. That was their hook. Not so much. I mean, I even have owned audio files on iTunes that I can rifle through if I wanted to. It's funny how the world changes in just a few short years.
Yeah, I've not managed my digital library on my computer for a decade at least. I need to figure out a new solution, basically. The way Spotify has gone, but it's going to be a big project to completely reorganize that and dig out my CDs and find I have to buy like a CD, an external CD drive or something. I don't even have one on my computer right now.
That's been my last 3 weeks, so let me tell you all about it. Don't worry, I won't bore the audience, but I'll tell you directly when we talk next.
Excellent. Okay, shall we jump to the main course?
Let's do it. Let's talk. So, of course, we have three courses here. We did just finish the appetizer. We're going to do an interesting shaped main course, and then we're going to do our dessert, where we go off topic. You're doing a little bit of a game roundup this time around, yeah?
Yes, yeah, I've been teasing that I've played quite a lot of games over the holidays that I wanted to talk about. I was going to get a bunch of them out of the way all at once. Specifically, I mean, we've both been talking about some of the older retro games we've been playing and the devices that we've been using. We've talked a little bit about the Final Fantasy series that we've both been playing. I took a break from that to I've been basically been playing the latest game in that series, Final Fantasy 16. So I took a break from my sort of retro odyssey through that to work through some other series. Specifically, I had in mind, having played several Metroidvanias, for lack of a better term, that I'm not particularly familiar with Metroid or Castlevania as a series. So I wanted to dig back into their respective legacies and see what all the fuss was about, where it all began. And first of all, Mark, have you played any of those series?
Yeah, I feel like I played a smattering of both of those series. It's just the fact of growing up in that generation. Like, those were two of the heaviest hitters out there. Funny enough, learning in retrospect, I covered Metroid Prime Remastered recently. And Metroid was far more popular in the West than it ever was in Japan, which was interesting to learn. So it's not really a phenomenon over there. It's just more of a thing they do for the wacky Westerns. And I think you're going to give some opinions about the relative quality of some of those entries. But yeah, I have not beaten any of the retro ones. And I don't know if I've beaten any of the modern ones either, but I've certainly played a lot of them. I played a lot of Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered recently, and I've really enjoyed both of those. As far as Castlevania goes, I played a smattering of each of those, but I just didn't have the patience in my youth to complete any of them. And I think the 3D entries of those, the newer entries of those, have had definitely mixed opinions, and I can't say I'm experienced with those either.
I think like Lords of Shadow. I think is there was two or three games in that sort of 3D action adventure games. I heard mixed things. I don't think that series has had any games released for like 10 years now. Unfortunately, it seems to be largely defunct. But that is to say, my personal experience, I played Super Metroid a few years ago, and enjoyed that well enough. I played a little bit of Dread, but borrowing it from the library, wasn't able to finish that, and until recently had never played any of the Castlevania games. So I'm going in fairly new here, and just again, it's hard to look at them objectively and try and consider what they were like at the time. I'm not trying to prove that I can beat these games. I'm just trying to see what the deal was. So I did rely on some save states, shall we say, for both of them. I likely would have never finished many of these games at all were it not for save states. They were all pretty difficult.
Hey, that's how anyone could get through retro games these days. There's no shame in that.
These games used to have to last us several months at a time. So now I've got several games, dozens of games every month. So yeah.
Or for me, I never beat them back in the day because they were just so frustrating to play. Yeah. For that reason, save states are a godsend, and that's why even Nintendo's for them on their retro platform, Nintendo Switch Classics.
The Metroid games specifically are on Nintendo Classics. Both the original Metroid, I guess I'll start with that. The original Metroid on the NES was released in 1986. So this was developed by Nintendo's in-house R&D 1 and Intelligent Systems, directed by Satoru Okada. And so, I mean, this is pretty early in the NES's lifespan. I don't remember the exact date it was released. I'm sure you've got that on off the dome.
What was it? 86?
Yeah.
For Metroid 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really early, and
it shows.
I mean, it really shows, and also like in the aesthetics, like just the fact that like this is clearly there's so many homages to Ridley Scott's Alien series, Not the least of which is there's a character or a creature named Ridley, if I'm not
One of
mistaken,
the
in
aliens, I
Metroid.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, and just the whole like kind of badass, what we would discover later, a female character, because it was actually, I think it was intended to be a surprise. Like everyone knows Samus now, Samus the badass bounty hunter, Samus is in like Smash Brothers and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's where I know them from. But I mean, I was watching a video on this earlier, and apparently, even in the instruction manual, it referred to Samus as he, and it was very much intended as a twist surprise that
Right.
the power armor comes off at the end, and she's in a bikini instead. So not the
Right.
most nuanced way of revealing that, I guess.
Yeah, some people argued that it was like a cheat code. Like if you got the good ending, you got Samus transformed into a woman or something like
Well, there
that.
was
Like
literally
she,
a cheat code that you play in her bikini, I believe, as well.
right. Yeah, so it was definitely. I think they knew what was purported to be the audience of games at the time, which was mostly, juvenile young boys. Although, to hear my wife say it, she was very interested in games back then and was kind of kept away from them from by her male siblings. So it's a shame to hear stories like that when maybe it would have been great to have cool role models more openly shared way back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at Fantasy Star, which we've discussed previously. But back to Metroid. So you do have this sort of semi-open world. You're exploring this space station ostensibly. There's only like three bosses to get through, including the final boss and a few collectibles along the way. So you are exploring this in a non-linear fashion, which I imagine for the time was pretty novel, especially this early in that console generation. It is incredibly hard to control. It's just Samus moves very clunkily, can only shoot in a very sort of stiff manner. There's enemies buzzing around all over the place. The platforming is like a lot of the game is like basically doodle jump. There's these long vertical corridors with these tiny little thin platforms. You gotta jump up one at a time while avoiding all these enemies. It gets a little tedious, I will say, and it's just incredibly difficult game because you're losing health pretty readily, and even when you die, sorry, when you die, it respawns you with like a sliver of your health. Even if you get new energy canisters to get to increase your max health, when you respawn, you still start at the original like 30 HP or whatever it is. So you have to go grind every time, and grinding is tedious. So before every boss attempt, before every sort of as you're just exploring, you have to go and grind out for another 10 minutes because like there's like one spot in the map where these enemies respawn that you can consistently get health upgrades. So it's pretty rough, I will say. The boss fights were all like very bullet hell, like just projectiles being tossed every which way. And perhaps not too surprisingly, considering how early this is in the generation, the performance is pretty rough. Even on the official Nintendo online, the frame rate is really slow and just glitching out quite frequently. So I know there have been remakes of this game that have fixed that, but it is an incredibly tough experience to go back to.
I can tell you that that was a real factor, especially on the real hardware back in the day. It's not anything that I guess kids of that generation thought was strange. I guess it was just that was the nature of playing those sorts of games. And in maybe just my personal perspective, I thought of them as phew, like I get a moment to breathe when the action is too intense in a game. Something like Mega Man, the original Mega Man had intense slow down, and certainly Metroid One still has it. And to me, it kind of feels a little nostalgic. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm playing a game from this generation now when the slowdown happens. In fact, it really was pushing the memory limits because some of those areas are really quite big and you can only navigate them like very slowly with the kind of the pan and scan moving from room to room, and really that's why one of the core staples of Metroid game design is having the doors that you shoot with your blaster.
It's like a loading screen.
Like exactly, it is literally a loading screen, and it's just some intentionality there. Is if you shoot the door bubble, then you're probably going to pass into the new area, and then you have that slow down as you move to the new area. Definitely is a hallmark of that game series.
The other thing, I mean, of clearly a limitation at the time as well, is that the rooms repeat themselves pretty frequently. So a lot of the rooms will look the same. A lot of those there's multiples of those vertical corridors that all look identical. There is no map in this game. So it's incredibly hard to navigate, especially when a lot of the secrets, like there are various points in which to progress you have to find these secret passageways that are pretty well hidden, and many of which are traps or just dead ends in these identical looking rooms. So yeah, pretty tricky unless you're mapping it out yourself or looking at Nintendo Power, I guess.
Yeah, I think in a previous episode I was trying to convince you that there was a map feature
Not in the original.
in Metroid One. I must have been confusing it with like Super Metroid has one though, right?
Oh yes, yeah. And Zero Mission, obviously the remake of the first game. But to breeze through these a little faster, I guess. So the next game, Metroid 2: Return of Samus, came out that 5 years later in 1991, directed by Hiroji Kiyotake and Hiroyuki Kimura. And so this came out on the Game Boy. So you might think is even more technically restrictive, but obviously 5 years later and fairly late in the Game Boy's lifespan, things had started to be. It started to figure out how to make these games, obviously, and so this definitely does play a fair bit better. The controls are a little tighter. It's not quite as punishing. The enemies are a little easier to deal with. The most interesting change here is that rather than this sort of progression through the bosses to get to the end, there's something like 30 or 40 Metroids, these sort of ultra enemies sort of scattered around the map, and you have to kill all of those. So it is a very novel sort of form of progression that you have to find all of the enemies to destroy them. Unfortunately, what that means is if you miss just one of those, then you're then scouring the map and having to backtrack and go back and forth to find them, because it still does not have a map. And the map is a little more diverse, but not having color does still make it very difficult to sort of figure out where you are exactly. And the map the secrets and the way the rooms are sort of connected tends to sort of spiral in some rather confusing ways, especially when, like, on the Game Boy screen, it's very zoomed in. You have very little situational awareness. But there are some fun upgrades here. A lot of the classics, like the Spazzer weapon, I think, which like shoots out multiple projectiles. There's like 3 or 4 different weapons you can switch between here. There's like this double jump. Essentially, you can just like keep jumping indefinitely. There's like a spider climbing. Like when you're in the morph ball, you sort of curl up into the morph ball, and you can like climb along the walls, and that's quite useful for some secrets as well. So yeah, it's a lot more robust in terms of the ways you have of navigating this world. It is still quite confusing. I had to refer to a guide a few times on that one.
Yeah, this is a game title that I never owned back at the time, but I've taken a look at some screenshots, and it's quite it's one of the better looking Game Boy games, I think. Definitely, it feels like, I mean, you can tell me if this is true or not, but it feels like a fully fledged entry into the series as opposed to like the cut down version of a Metroid.
Definitely feels a lot more confident, just a clearer vision of what that genre is. It's still not quite. Obviously, all of these games are existing in this very, very fuzzy genre definition. We don't have the tropes developed yet. They're all trying to reinvent the wheel every game. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting how that game introduced some of the standards, like that spider ball is a staple even in later games like Metroid Prime. So that's cool to see there. And I think I've heard the term search action game bandied about by some people. I never really understood that, because like you're searching things in lots of games. In lots of games, like you're searching things in first person shooters. Everything's searching for the key to the next room in so many genres.
Bearing the lead a little bit there, but my takeaway from playing these games is that the Metroidvania name is pretty arbitrary and useless. I mean, both these series have a pretty diverse range of mechanics and styles. Like when you say Metroidvania, you tend to think 2D action platformer, but both of these games have 3D instances. I mean, I'll save this for another episode, but I've been playing the Zelda series, and there's a lot of similarities with that, which I think is have more in common than not. So I think it's pretty fuzzy. Search action apparently is the Japanese term for the genre, or the translation of that, obviously. I think has bad mouthfeel. I don't love that, but
I don't love it either. But sure.
yeah, I mean, these genre definitions are only useful insofar as it helps us have a conversation, and I personally think it's pretty limiting in how we talk about these games to like reduce them down just to this one particular version of Castlevania and Metroid when they're both quite diverse series and genre.
Yeah, I would probably call them non-linear action adventure games because they do have action, they do have adventure in the sense that you're leveling up and growing, not unlike a mild form of RPG-ness. Maybe you might be talking about some of the games that later introduce RPG elements to Metroidvanias, but some of those exist as well. Probably not this early on, though.
I think that name mostly only exists because there are so many imitators, and most of those imitators have really zeroed in on this one particular iteration. And I think part of that is just the ease of creating a 2D action platformer. Obviously, a lot easier than making a 3D action platformer. I think you've got one of those to talk about a little later, perhaps. But especially when most of these games are indie, generally, it's a lot more work. It's somewhat easier to. I mean, not to say that Silksong doesn't take a lot of work. Obviously, it took many years, but we have that language associated with that style of this for this genre.
And really, at the core of it, isn't it about backtracking? It's about literally taking a non-linear path, having to crisscross as much as possible, which extends the length of the game, and also is quite satisfying when you see, oh, there's that door up there that I can't reach somehow. I'm going to bookmark that in my brain, and I'm going to come back to it. It feels good to have that, and ultimately, when you get there, you look back and think, I started out so small, but now I'm able to reach such heights.
Well, see, if you consider that as the primary touchstone of the genre, that is why I was thinking Zelda is so much in conversation here. Like, you get the hook shot, suddenly you can go back to all these other previous locations and reach those heart pieces or access new areas. And I think that like those series are different in many ways. Like Zelda has come to be more puzzle oriented, where Metroid, Castlevania, more action combat platforming oriented. But I think both of those exist on a spectrum as well.
Maybe Ocarina of Time is the greatest Metroidvania of all.
There you go. Yeah, so I think I'll jump over to the Castlevania series. And so I think my biggest takeaway from this little experiment is, especially at this generation of these series, how much better Castlevania has held up. To bury the lead there. So this first game came out in 1986, about 2 months after the first Metroid game. It was on the NES, but also various other platforms, the Commodore 64, the Amiga. There was an arcade version, apparently. Sort of Konami was covering all their bases at this point. This and all three of the NES games are directed by Hitoshi Akamatsu. And, I mean, I was just talking about how badly Metroid performs. This came out about the same time, and it still holds up pretty well in how it performs. Like, there's not much slowdown. Obviously, it is a fairly slow game, but it performs pretty reliably. Like, you know what you get as you're moving through here. It feels a little slow jumping around by today's standards, but it is quite predictable, and it's very much about timing and precision more than sort of reflexes. Like, you have your whip is the main weapon in these games that you sort of shoot out in front of you, and it's very much like waiting for enemies to walk into your whip rather than, leaping and bouncing around like you do in Metroid, obviously. So I think in that sense that this more sort of slower, more considered action is held up a little better. Not to say that this game is easy. It is, I mean, by the end, it gets pretty difficult in that I never would have beaten. I'm sure were I playing it at release. It's... the one thing I will say for it is that it's pretty... the difficulty curve is pretty consistent and smooth. Like it's a gradual increase. It doesn't feel particularly spiky. You'll gradually it gradually increases in a way that feels pretty satisfying. These games are clearly about mastery. You're going to be memorizing attack patterns, the locations of some of the weapons and upgrades. It's like the secret wall chicken and things. So it's obviously a game that you're meant to replay a bunch and memorize all these locations. And I'm sure that would have been quite satisfying back in the day, where again, playing this one game for several months. I did anecdotally hear that, at least for Castlevania 3, I'm not sure if it was the same for the first one, that the Japanese version was much easier. That when the Americans localized it, they specifically made it a lot harder. I think because they wanted people from Blockbuster to go and have to borrow it again just to finish it. They didn't want everyone finishing it in one sitting, essentially. So it is interesting how much of these difficulty decisions are as much marketing than intentional design decisions from the developers.
Yeah, that's funny because they did like the exact opposite with the Mario series, where Mario 2 in Japan was apparently extremely difficult, and they thought that would scare off some Western fans. So I guess attitudes change even amongst Western publishers.
Absolutely. So yeah, just to breeze through these, I'm going to jump quickly to Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. So this came out about a year later, 1987, in Japan at least. And I mean, the biggest surprise about this is how different it is. This feels very similar to Zelda 2, which I'll be talking about in a future episode. Very much a black sheep in how different it is from the first game. And you think with these games that they're pumping them out so quickly that they'd just be iterating and throwing a 2 on it and like just more levels, easy made. But this is pretty different. I think the combat, the core moment-to-moment combat is still very similar. The way you're attacking with your whip and jumping and platforming, that all feels very familiar. But the whole structure otherwise is completely different. You've got it's a semi-open world, almost a bit like a Metroidvania, where it's basically like five or six mansions or almost a little bit like Zelda dungeons, basically, but you have to go through, get to the end, you get an upgrade that will help you either in combat or to navigate the world in a slightly different way, just to see platforms that were previously invisible or so on. There's towns. You walk around these towns and talk to the townsfolk. You can buy some upgrades. They'll give you some clues as to how to solve the puzzles. And so it's really is an adventure game rather than, I mean, the first game was very much an arcadey action platformer, and that's about it. This is an adventure puzzle game, essentially. And I really enjoyed it. It's not dated well in the fact that, I mean, the localization was bad. Apparently, they really bungled the translation from Japanese, especially with the text restrictions for one thing. There were some really vague clues, so I did have to use a guide for this as well. But the core mechanics, I think, were really satisfying. There's some level up mechanics, like when you kill enemies, you get hearts that don't heal you. They give you charges for your sub-weapons, which is the same for all of these games.
That used to aggravate me to no end. Every other game in history, video gaming history, told you that hearts were to replenish your health, and this game decided to throw that out the window, and I'm still mad to this day. Maybe that's why I never did finish any of those Castlevania games.
Yeah. Always confusing. The health is always from the wall chickens or other things. But yeah, when you're killing these enemies, you also get experience that will level you up when you hit a certain threshold. But when you die, you lose that experience. So it almost feels just as much like a prototypical Souls-like game as well. And so it really is doing some interesting things in terms of progression and exploration that I really enjoyed. It's by far the easiest of this series. There's only 3 bosses. One of them you can just walk right past. Like all of these games have Death, the Reaper as a boss. You can just walk straight past him to the other door. Like, not today, Death. See you later.
Just like the original Mario, huh? I mean, those games, they provided you options. Like, forget Undertale. This is the real player choice back then.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this one as a very experimental, pivot of what this genre can be. apparently we have this game to blame for the whole genre of angry gamers yelling about retro video games. This was the very first episode of Angry Video Game Nerd, which himself spawned a whole range of other imitators, obviously. So apparently very maligned, this game. It's my favorite of the series. I know I'm not sure how much the series continues this trend, but I really enjoyed it as an experiment.
Everything you're describing makes it sound much more appealing than any of the other entries in the series, so maybe if I tackle one more seriously, I'll try this one first.
Definitely, you will need a guide unless you're extremely patient and or just really willing to trial and error your way through crouching in every single location across the map. But yeah, worth it just for to see how they're iterating and experimenting with those genre conventions. Quickly, Castlevania 3. Dracula's Curse came out in 1989, and this is the sequel I expected to be. It is basically more of the same as 1, which was a little disappointing. It is definitely tighter. It's more difficult, but it feels somewhat fair in the way that it ramps up in difficulty, at least. It has some branching paths in between some levels. It has unlockable characters. Again, a lot of this feels like replayability. Like you can play through the game multiple times and get a slightly different experience. I mean, I really enjoyed this. I mean, but one thing I've not mentioned, all of these games have pretty banging music, especially even for their time. Those soundtracks hold up really well. I'm sure we've all heard the sort of the power metal covers the Japanese bands have done of these. They've all been remixed to death. But yeah, they're classic. I respect what Castlevania 3 is doing. I can see why a lot of people love this game. It's not for me, just in terms of that core structure being very arcadey and linear, and largely about just memorizing attack patterns.
Yeah, perhaps the Metroidvania moniker really arises from some of the later entries in the
I think
Castlevania
so.
series.
Yeah.
Like in the GBA era and, obviously PlayStation as well, like Symphony of the Night. Those games become much more elaborate and spill over into, like I was alluding to, like more RPG style systems, more like shops and more characters that you interact with. They just kind of built them out into a more fleshed out and more like difficult action games, and really kind of that was the heyday, not these early period, ironically, but I feel like the PlayStation 1 and GBA is where this game series really kind of like blew up in a lot of
I know
ways.
Symphony of the Night is the main touchstone for a lot of people. That's that's the key origin of the sort of the Castlevania reference, I believe. I'm looking forward to those and having these games be a little more exploration focused. I really wanted to know what the origin was. Like I said, not to say that I could beat these games, as I very much couldn't if it wasn't for save states, but I wanted to understand their legacy and where they're coming from here. So yeah, I definitely do see the appeal, even if they're not necessarily for me. Finally, a couple of other quick ones there was a couple of Game Boy games in the Castlevania series. There's Castlevania The Adventure, which also came out in '89. So I think this was before 2 and 3. And it was in the first year of the Game Boy. So similarly to the first Metroid, this really suffered from they hadn't figured out the technical limitations of this new system yet. I'm sure at the time, just the gimmick of having one of these like a sprawling adventure game in your hands would have been a huge gimmick. It plays pretty horribly, even compared to the other games here. It's by far the worst, I think. It's just extremely slow and plodding in the movement. The controls are really unresponsive. The platforming required like pixel perfect precision. You miss this jump, you have to be in the exact right spot to make this jump. Otherwise, you restart the whole level again, basically. So that was pretty frustrating.
I don't remember if it was number 1 or 2 on the Game Boy, but I had one of these on the original black and white Game Boy, and I just remember this is probably the Castlevania that I've devoted the most time into, and I remember really enjoying them, or really enjoying being able to devote time to them, and I feel like I retroactively went to some of those other Castlevania games on the NES, and I feel like they have a much like kind of muddier art style. That it was much more easy to read all of what was going on in the more simplistic high contrast graphics of the Game Boy. High contrast as in there was only two colors. They were actually not that far apart. Probably on the retro systems, you can crank up the contrast and have like really perfect. But I actually enjoyed the design of the Game Boy Castlevania that I played anyway.
Yeah, the NES games do have a lot of color happening. Basically, a lot of contrasting colors that aren't always easy to read. The way they're constantly switching. Obviously, a lot of dark gothic colors there. But yeah, the this first Game Boy game, it was the actual combat in the moment was easier than the others, and actually there was more health upgrades. It wasn't just a secret wall chicken. There was actually like health orbs dropping pretty frequently. I think hearts actually do heal you in this one game, funnily enough. But the prize here was the follow up to that, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, not to be confused with the other Castlevania 2, but the Game Boy Castlevania 2 came out in 1991. I was playing that today. Haven't quite beaten the final boss yet. But it does hold up remarkably well, I think. It is still somewhat simplified. That first Game Boy game didn't have any of the sub-weapons, by the way, it just had the whip. This second Game Boy game introduces a couple of the sub-weapons, like you can throw an axe or holy water, which just mixes up your options a little bit. But the combat and the movement is tightened up here again. It feels pretty reliable and consistent to move around and attack. The bosses, I think, are the best in the series that I've seen so far. They aren't just a monster walking back and forth throwing projectiles. There's some really creative boss design in this second Game Boy game. So yeah, I'm quite enjoying it. It's still somewhat easier, but it's playing with some sort of gimmicky level designs. It's like a Mega Man level select screen. We can do there's 4 levels. We can do them in any order. So that was interesting too. So I think that's the highlight as well. But both Castlevania 2s, I think, are my favorites so far.
That's kind of cool. Maybe it was the number 2 on Game Boy that I ended up playing because I really liked it quite a bit.
I think there was a third one, Castlevania Legends or something. I haven't quite gotten to yet.
Yeah, apparently in Japan only there was like a what they call Kid Dracula.
Yes.
It's on one of the collections available in the West. I have a bunch of the Castlevania collections on Steam, so I should really pull them out. Like there was 3 GBA ones and 3 DS ones even. Apparently, some of the DS ones are pretty intense from what I've seen.
It's an incredibly prolific series. I mean, just there was 5 of these games just in the time which Metroid had 2. Obviously, there's a lot more to come, and I mean, Konami obviously are pretty prolific at just pumping these things out. And there's a couple even in this time period that I haven't played. There was an arcade game that I don't remember the name of, and there was another one called Vampire Killers between 1 and 2, which I feels like it was, I believe, that missing a link between that arcadey first game and the sort of more open-ended exploration second game. But it was on like the was it the MX something or rather?
MSX.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it was on a console that wasn't widely available, so I haven't been able to track that down.
All right. Very cool. You're making me, you're whetting my appetite for 2D vampire killing action.
Yes, well, I mean, I said I have played a lot of the Zelda games from this era as well that I'll be talking about at some point, and I've started to move on to the SNES era, which let me just say, like I lived through that era, but going back to it retroactively, it is such a huge leap in quality. Let me tell you, I mean, it is just light years in improvement in not just in graphic design, but just tightness of controls, the clarity of design and intentionality in these games.
Games really grew up in that generation, and also games as an industry expanded a lot more. So there's just that many more titles, that many more new companies founded, and that they were building upon the classics. So yeah, definitely SNES is an era for the ages. Anyways, if you're done talking about your retro titles, I'm going to continue on the discussion of vampires and gothic action in the Metroidvania fashion, but with a slightly newer entry. I'm going to be talking about The Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver 1. Now, this is a game that hails from 1999, so about 10 years after I guess, Castlevania 2 that you were mentioning. Sorry, Castlevania the Adventurer and Castlevania 3 that you were mentioning.
I
10
was
years later,
watching
they would release that.
I was watching a video saying that it was contemporary roughly with Ocarina of Time. It's
Yes,
like a
that's right.
3D
Ocarina of
adventure game.
Time is from 1998, so this is
Mm.
1 year later. And I'll be talking about a couple other games from around that period as well, because it compares more or less favorably to some pretty famous titles, let me just say. So, the Legacy of Kain series has always been kind of confusing, even to me, who played a few of the entries. So, Legacy of Kain was, I think it was called Blood Omen.
I looked at the naming convention of this series and just went into a fugue state. It was
Yeah,
just like it was real relay
there's,
race of Legacy of Kain, Blood Omens,
yes,
then Blood Omens 2, then Legacy of Kain 2.
then Defiance. It's because Soul Reaver 1 and 2 is a series within the Legacy of
Right.
Kain series.
Yeah.
So, I didn't even know until today that Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver was the second game in the series. So I knew it was not the first, but I didn't know it was number two. So let me just clarify that there was a game, I believe it was on PlayStation 1, called The Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. And it was a 2D top-down game, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
I never played it. I still haven't played it. But I did play Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver back in the day, 1999. And I played it more recently on the Nintendo Switch because they did a remaster in 2024. It's called Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remastered. And like I said, it came out just a couple of years ago. So they polished it up. It's a little bit more high res, but let me tell you, it does not look like a modern title. There are, like, they're doing a really spiffed up looking Lara Croft. They're doing a new Tomb Raider remake of number one. I think it's not yet out yet, but it looks like light years ahead of this title. So if you check out this remaster, don't have your expectations too high.
Funnily enough, I heard that this developer had also had previously done remasters of some earlier Tomb Raider games.
No, that could well be. Yeah. So, there's an interesting story in the developers involved as well. I'm not sure who put together remastered of this series, but the original developer of Legacy of Kain was Silicon Knights. And
Hmm.
Silicon Knights is kind of like infamous for later on developing a series called or a game called Eternal Darkness.
Oh,
Sanity's
okay.
Requiem is one of my favorite games of the GameCube. Uh, Maybe my favorite GameCube game, despite some of the great first party. It's definitely my favorite third party GameCube game. Let me just say. And our frequent guest, Dennis Ryan, also loves Eternal Darkness. So Silicon Knights produced number one, and apparently there was some sort of like legal wrangling or whatnot, and then a different team came on to complete Soul Reaver. So what is Soul Reaver? Soul Reaver takes place like 1,500 years after the events in number one, so I don't feel too bad about missing that. Basically, I don't know. It's a story where like you play the bad guys. Like you play a minion of Cain from like the Bible, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
okay.
So Cain, the original vampire, a cast down mortal, who I
The
don't know. I
K, I
guess
should say.
yeah, exactly. I guess yeah, you're right. Maybe it isn't the one from the Bible. Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess the Bible Cain is the with the C, and this one is with the K, but it's still to do with blaspheming. So let me just say that they're connected that way. So in this series, I don't know. Cain is like a uber vampire, and he wins and like subjugates all of humanity into slavery and creates a paradise if you love heavy metal hellscapes. And Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver is where this lieutenant of Kain's called Raziel. I always thought his name was Azrael, but it's Raziel. Is this regular old vampire dude who got a little bit too uppity, and Kain got jealous and cast Raziel down into the depths of Uber Hell or something like that. So he like falls and falls and falls, and he like gets burned in torment, and his body gets disfigured, and he turns into this kind of ogre impish character who's like blue on the cover. So if you see this weird kind of blue gargoyle looking guy, that's our friend Raziel. He doesn't even have a lower jaw; it's fallen
Yeah.
off, and he covers it with
Oh, he's
this
got like a mask over it, doesn't he? Yeah.
convenient cloth, so
Okay.
he looks kind of like a bandito. And his trademark action is that after he defeats evil enemy, he can absorb their souls. So he's the soul Reaver. He collects souls, and it kind of replenishes his health. In fact, they spell it out from early on. Basically, this like elder god revives you after you fall to your depths and are in agony for centuries, years and years and centuries. I think 1,500 years pass, and then you're reborn. I don't know why so late, but the world has changed into a greater hellscape, and you're trying to gain, I guess, vengeance against Kain and your brethren, the other servants of Kain. So you can already tell this storyline is just super over the top, melodramatic, exactly the kind of storyline a 13-year-old suburban kid who loves listening to heavy metal would just, love to go on and on about. Maybe he draws the stylish, the cool S or whatever in his notebook or
Read
whatnot.
off an Iron Maiden cover, right?
Yeah, for sure. So like the story's not much to write home about, but it's delivered in a kind of like a cute, over the top way. It's very, very self serious, very, very kind of laughable. But this, I'm telling you, this is 1999. So there's other aspects of this game that are good and bad. Let's talk about the music. The music is, this is like the heyday of Nine Inch Nails. And as a result, this game has like this really, really repetitive, bad, like EDM soundtrack to it.
Through the
The
synthesizer, obviously. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly. It's cut down, and it's like it's only got like two tracks that I've heard so far. It's really, really kind of grating on the ears. So that is a low aspect of this title. It's no Quake soundtrack, let me tell you. But there are other aspects of this game that are good. So this is a 3D Metroidvania game. I kind of forgot. I have memories of playing this game, but I kind of forgot what it was moment to moment. All I remembered was that Raziel sucked in souls, and there were some puzzles along the way. So you wake up, and then you're basically sent down this hallway, and then you walk through these very, very gray, grimy interiors. The camera controls. I don't remember if the earlier version allowed you to control the camera. Probably not, because the
PlayStation only had
PS1
like the
had one
one joystick.
stick.
Yeah.
Right. PS1 only had one analog stick, so it probably wasn't even self-controlled then. But in the remake, because it was made in modern times, you are allowed to control the camera. But the camera is just so close on your character, just kind of right behind his shoulders, because this is a third-person action game, that it doesn't even feel good to control it. And oftentimes you'll find that when you're walking down a hallway that only curves in a certain direction, the camera will be taken over out of your control to account for this. And it never lets you even like easily look up. There is a sort of like stop and look, 3D look to option, kind of like not unlike in Ocarina of Time that we talked about. Or I think even in some of the Resident Evil games, you had an ability to stop and look, but
Mm.
it's a little bit awkward to access. So in a game that is essentially all about environmental puzzles and a lot of puzzle solving, it's not innate or very fun or easy to puzzle out some of these environmental puzzles, mostly because it's hard to just see them. So, I mean, I'm playing on my Switch Lite, so maybe I'm causing my own problems here. But I don't think even on a slightly larger screen, portably wise, it would be easy to see some of these solutions. So some of these gameplay elements are pretty tried and true, let's just say classic techniques. We talked about how Ocarina of Time came out in 1998. I've been playing a lot of Metroid Prime Remastered, which I went to lengths talking about that. But that game would come out years after this. I think 3 years after the original, after 1999. So it's a stark contrast between the kind of the fidelity of which the world is created. Metroid Prime feels really natural. The environments are kind of beautiful to look at, and they're designed very well. Everything is very readable. The creatures, they don't, it doesn't really feel natural, but they feel like they make sense within context. So I wouldn't say it's a, very similitude in terms of like a vibrant world, but the way that the levels are designed in this 1999 Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver is very much just like puzzle room to puzzle room. There's not a lot of fluency to it. There's not a lot of fluidity to it. It's just, let's just say rudimentary. A lot closer to the design style of another Crystal Dynamics action-adventure game that you might be familiar with called 1996's Tomb Raider. Did you ever play the original Tomb Raider back in the day?
No.
Or a
I
version of it?
played the modern trilogy. I've not played any of the older games.
Yeah, you really had to play those games to kind of get a sense of the kind of like awkward early graspings at 3D adventure games. Obviously, you had Mario 64 that really blew out the 3D adventure game, but this is slightly different. Those were 3D platformers that were really bubbly and unrealistic in scope. These ones kind of tried to build like grounded worlds. Let's just say Tomb Raider definitely tried to build grounded worlds, but they still had T-Rexes you had to fight and things like that. But the worlds were not very inspired. They were very brown and green and gray, and this kind of feels very much like this. I would say that the game design of this original Soul Reaver is feels very much kind of like a reskin of 1996's Tomb Raider. And I guess that would make for a really smart business move because they already had the engine, presumably. They already had the know-how. I think they just wanted to make another, smash hit like Tomb Raider. And apparently this game was a hit. It
Let's get a
sold
sequel.
like, yeah, enough to get a sequel. That's right. It was already itself a sequel. But this game was critically acclaimed, and it ended up selling like 1.5 million copies, which was classified as a hit back then. It's remarkable for how few copies you'd had to sell to be considered a hit back then.
And I remember
But
Tomb
of
Raider
course,
complaining that they didn't sell 10 million copies not that long ago.
yeah, exactly. But I guess the budgets were a lot smaller back in these days. So, what I'll say about Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, there's something there. The puzzles are fun, but it's just really, really kind of awkward and lacks that fluency of definitely first party Nintendo games. It doesn't ever reach the heights of 3D Zelda ever did, even from the original onwards. It's just kind of like a B tier, I would say, in terms of level design. Character design is really, disappointing. Some of the bosses look cool. They're like quite over the top. You get these kind of mutated, monstrous forms of Vraziel's siblings that have kind of mutated over the millennia. But the inhabitants of these vampire realms are just kind of uninspired, and there's only two or three of them, and they just serve as just kind of impediments for you reaching the puzzles. And the puzzles themselves are vary between really obvious or really kind of old fashioned. Like this game let me tell you, I've only finished up until the first boss area, but I've already encountered far too many block pushing puzzles
We got all soccer bands.
for my taste. Yeah, it's 3D Sokoban all
Yeah.
around. And one of the areas I was just like scratching in my head over and over and over is like, this can't be that hard. This can't be that hard. But there's a literally something they never tell you about is that you can, unlike a lot of 3D games that have block pushing puzzles, you can lift the blocks vertically, right? I don't know about you, but I never associate block pushing puzzles with the ability to
You
lift them
always
up.
do that?
In this game, you could, but they never tell you how. There's some tutorialization. Actually, I would say that there isn't tutorialization. There's a lot of narrative voiceover.
I don't think games had quite gotten the hang of like in-game tutorialization yet. You were still referring to the manual largely, right?
Yeah. So let's just say this game feels like a really kind of like a game in the awkward adolescence of the 3D transition.
Yeah.
If the youth and the naive days of our youth was the 8-bit era, the adolescence was the 16,
It was
and
an
then
awkward
this
teen
one
phase, wasn't it?
was the awkward teen phase. Yeah, let's just say that. But I think there's something there. I think there's something there. I'm going to continue playing it for a little bit longer. Maybe my opinion of it will improve over time. And there must be something that stuck with me because I remember generally having positive feelings about Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. I guess I like, adventure puzzle games and search action games. And this is one of them that does it fairly well, but it doesn't reach the height of any of the first-party Nintendo games.
Yeah, I mean, how early is this into the PlayStation era? It's like how starving were people for just anything 3D at this point, and were willing to like forgive those weird experiments?
Well, I mean, I guess your first example should be a few years earlier than that. It should be Tomb Raider. It's like, there's no reason why that game should be as legendary and as popular and as lauded as it is, except I guess its character had pointy boobs, and I don't know.
People could take what they get at that point and
I don't know.
just latch onto
That's
it.
that's about it, because the 3D gameplay was never that amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, obviously, in contrast to the sort of games you're getting on Nintendo, the sort of the bright, colourful character platformers, and PlayStation obviously being a lot more edgy and darker games, and people were really craving more of those, I guess.
Actually, I think you're right. I think that's it. Really, in 1999, this was the start of, this was the time of the original Matrix. Kids, all media was trying to grow up and be edgier and darker, and they were trying to put that kiddie stuff behind them. So I guess that can kind of be held as one of the reasons why Crystal Dynamics' darker themed games were really quite popular at the time. Starting with Tomb Raider, this Legacy of Kain series would be next, and then I think eventually, don't quote me on this, but I think they were involved in the Deus Ex series, if I'm not mistaken. All games that I do have ashamedly some fond memories of.
The Invisible War, the sequel to that, was a console game, right?
Yeah,
I want to say?
yeah, disappointingly so. The first game was PC only, amazing. Invisible War was on the Xbox. I played
that
it on the
era.
Xbox.
Okay.
And it was a real sad turn of events compared to that. Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Maybe we'll have a Deus Ex comparison discussion sometime, but that's it for my opinion on this early 3D Metroidvania. It's not the best. It's not the worst. I'm going to keep playing it because I guess I have some nostalgia for it.
I do recall watching NoClip, the YouTube channel, put out a documentary on the remaster of this game. It's worth checking out if you're interested. I watched that like last year sometime. I don't remember much specifics, but if you're a fan of that series, they went into a lot of the details there. I do recall that, much like the Halo Master Chief Collection, you could switch between the old and the new remaster graphics with the click of a button, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to do that, so I haven't seen it yet. But I've seen, the trailers have shown the before and after, and it does look quite a bit more polished. And one thing I failed to mention in my general description of this game is that a lot like the Nintendo game Ocarina of Time that came out a couple of years earlier, this game has you kind of swapping between two worlds.
Mm.
There's like a spectral world and then there's a like material world. And it's only like slight differences. The geometry of the world is roughly the same, but you might notice a platform in a different position. So you do that hoary old item where you have to jump between worlds to solve a lot of puzzles. And that technique always gets me somehow. I kind of love it. So that's an enjoyable aspect of it as well.
Amazing gimmick. Yeah, I was trying to remember when this is in relation to another series that gives me similar vibes, Darksiders. Apparently, that didn't come out until 2010, but it had that similar, like, I think you're the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but they're very much angels versus demons.
Yeah.
That you're playing War, the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, solving Zelda puzzles for some
Yeah.
reason. I do fondly remember that one.
Spiritual successor, let's just
Yeah,
say.
yeah. God of War, it probably fits in there as well. It's a little, I think it was 2005, the first one of those.
Yeah. Grim dark 3D action adventure games.
Not quite as much puzzle solving. I think there are a few small ones in some of those games.
Yeah. Even in the newer entries in the God of War series.
Gotta figure out where to throw your axe to weigh down a gate, I guess.
There you
Yeah.
go. All right, we talked at length. Shall we talk quickly about our dessert topics?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'm going to go through this one really quick. This time it's a novel of... I don't think I've covered this one yet, but tell me if I did.
Doesn't sound familiar. No.
Have I talked about A Magical Girl Retires?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, maybe it sounds familiar because it's another short Asian authored novel. This time it's not Japanese author, it's Korean. Fantasy slash superhero style story, but it's not a very typical one. At least it's not typical as far as the Western kind of tropes of it are involved. It's a really interesting novel about kind of an unlikely anti-hero. Not really an anti-hero, but maybe like a character who doesn't want to be the hero. By the way, this the title of that again is A Magical Girl Retires. The author is Park Seo-leon, and I've read it in English, but it was originally written in Korean. And this is interesting for being a post-pandemic era story. So it's relatively new. And like I said, the book is itself short, but I really like how the chapters of this story are set up. The chapters are short, and they're really propulsive. The plot moves forward without being too complicated, and each of the short chapters are started with a couple of manga style panels. So that's kind of further adding to the comic book hero aspects of this. And as you might interpret from the title, Magical Girl doesn't just mean a girl who has magical aspects, but is the subgenre of media, typically of Asian origin, that includes things like Sailor Moon, Pretty Cure, or more recently, K-pop Demon Hunters is a prime example of the magical girl concept, subgenre. And in fact, in the story they explain, well, what makes me a magical girl? Because the character is not a girl, is an adult woman in this case. And there's the new hero that doesn't want to be a hero is being mentored by a more experienced one, and they're saying, well, you don't have to be a girl. There's older women who are magical girls, but what it requires to be a magical girl in this universe is that you need to have vulnerability. You need to have felt weak against some sort of overwhelming force. And to that end, the main character definitely fits that bill. In fact, she gets kind of inducted into this world of magical girls, but she doesn't even know what her ability is through most of it. That kind of gets revealed to her even later. So this is a really, really interesting story. that it doesn't go to typical places. I should also mention that there are, some topics that might, might not be best for all audiences. The topics of depression and suicide come up in the story as well. So really not the sort of typical superhero story that you might be expecting, or even a bright, bubbly theme that you would typically associate with magical girls. So really, I like this story for how innovative it is, and just kind of unconventional it is, for not following so many typical English language fantasy tropes. So this kind of is making me think what I like about shorter Japanese and Korean now novels is that I like their brevity, and I like their kind of like poetry. They don't say too much, and they leave some things unexplained, and they're just really strong on vibes, I find, in a lot of cases, and this is very much that case. I find a lot of modern English language novels spend far too much time on world building, giving you like a 3-page introduction on a character that, like you just don't even care about because like their motivations are so unclear. I think kind of the Western fantasy novel world has kind of been destroyed by the legacy of people like J.R.R. Tolkien, who deserve to have a legacy because they did build these amazing worlds. But they didn't start by building the world, right? They started by writing interesting stories, little character pieces, and the worlds came later. I feel like modern English fantasy authors have it the cart before the horse a little bit sometimes.
Committing a little too committed to the 1,000-word tomes for the sake of it.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's not just English authors as well. Obviously, lots of like manga authors have an intense, incredibly deep amount of world building in play, lots of rules for things about how the universe works, but they don't front load it so much. They weave it in over time. They've probably written their story Bible, but they only give you so much at a time because they realize the audience doesn't have the capacity to take it all in like a fire hose. Anyways, I'm going extemporaneously. Please tell us about your item.
Yeah, just a quick one. A movie that I found recommended in Unwinnable, reading through their sort of end of the year breakdowns. It is called Royal Hotel. Came out in 2023. It was basically it's about two American backpackers going to the Australian outback to work in a remote pub out there. So, I mean, obviously, I'm always getting a little nostalgic for Australian media, so I was drawn to that. But it stars Julia Garner and Jessica Henwick. Julia, who a lot of people will know from Weapons, which I watched just a couple of nights ago and have some mixed feelings on, shall we say. But this basically they're two young women in a remote town filled with largely a lot of men from the local mining facility and a lot of alcohol, which, as you can imagine, leads to a powder keg. And you know what powder kegs do? Well, for content warning, I will say, like, it's very tense and threatening. It does stop short of anything truly uncomfortable, at least physically, shall we say, if that's a concern. It does explore a lot of the different types of toxic masculinity you might find. A lot of people might feel that's a little too obvious, but I found it a really sort of a tense thriller. Hugo Weaving plays sort of the owner of the owner of the pub and struggling with his own issues. It reminded me a lot of Kate Beaton's Ducks, the graphic novel about sort of life in the oil sands. A similar remote community filled with a lot of toxic masculinity and all the ways that can express itself, obviously. I quite enjoyed that. Royal Hotel.
Very cool. Love the breadth of content that we're covering these days. Yeah, that was a long episode, but we went in depth into a lot of interesting places.
Yeah, a lot of
Okay,
games covered there.
yeah, for sure. All right, any other business before we wrap it up?
I guess we do have Terminal City Tabletop Convention coming up here in just a couple of months, really. So if you're at all interested in joining us up here in Vancouver, there's going to be a lot of fun 3 full days of board games and TTRPGs and Jubentia and a lot of other. I think we're trying to get some miniature painting. Dennis Ryan will know more about that. But yeah, looking forward to that. Hopefully, we'll have some time to get some fun games in there.
Yep, I got my passes lined up. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so let's tell the folks where they can follow us online.
Yes, well, you can find me at Board Game Feast over at Blue Sky, and you can find our Omnigamers Club account at Blue Sky as well.
Yep, and I'm Mark Uasa, MarkYuasa .bsky.social. On that platform, that's pretty much it. But you can always follow us on YouTube, where we post videos of each of our episodes. And if you want to dig into our older back catalog, our earliest episodes are only available in audio form in a podcatcher of your choosing. So check us out, subscribe there, subscribe everywhere. Leave comments, tell your friends to follow us as well. We love feedback because it inspires us to keep producing these episodes.
Yep. If you have any questions or comments about today's games, you have any recommendations for Metroidvanias or your favorite of that series, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website omnigamers.club.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. It's been fun to talk to you about Metroidvanias. I'm really jealous that you've caught up to so many legendary titles from my youth while I struggle to get through modern games, any games really, these
Helps
days.
that most of them are fairly short.
Yeah, it's true. I should just dig in and enjoy the game save states.
Yes.
They're there for a reason.
Yeah. And one other plug I'd forgotten I wanted to mention is that I've started writing some written reviews, especially with a lot of the games I played over the break, and I want to try and express some thoughts in a slightly different way, a more sort of carefully worded way, shall we say. And I don't want to give into this trend of everything having to be video. I love the written form, and so just trying to get into the habit of writing a little more. So right now I don't really have any way to publish those. I've been putting them up on Backlogged, to a website that people use to log the games they've played, basically. I've been posting them there for now. I'll drop the link in the show notes, but I've got some longer reviews of Baby Steps and Many Nights a Whisper to start off there.
Cool. I will check that out. So subscribed on Backlogged. Although I'm more of a fan of the IGN platform playlist. I know IGN's not the best, but I like the way that website works.
Yeah, I don't think Backlogged is a long-term solution, but I don't want to be locked to like Steam or a sales platform, right? I like that it's a little independent and focused on just the reviews.
There you go. Another topic to keep an eye on. All right. Well, we talked at length. Lots of topics to revisit in the future. But that's for another episode. I'd like to thank the audience for staying with us this long.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for listening. And remember to have a balanced diet of games. Bye.
Bye.